Alright, today I'm going to share with you a couple of tips on how to get the best results with the Pocket 4 when using it in a studio environment. So first of all, please use the DJI Mimo app on your phone or tablet to be able to preview yourself on a bigger screen, which makes it significantly easier to compose yourself, expose your shot, white balance your shot, and also set up the lighting equipment. Personally, I put my phone here on this magic arm that is attached to my tripod, which makes it significantly easier to remove the phone, check what I need to check, and if I film with the Pocket 4, I can magnetically attach it back and basically properly preview the shot basically. Right, next, when it comes to lighting, I'm using a lot of fancy lighting equipment in this shot to make the background a little bit more interesting. But if you don't have access to as many lights as I do, I would at least recommend investing in a good key light setup to properly light yourself. I would look for something that has at least 60 watts of output, preferably 100 watts. I'm using 200 watts because that's what I have. But the more the better, usually, because you want to give yourself a bit of headroom, especially if you are planning to shoot with like action cameras, pocket cameras in a studio environment. You will need a lot of output because the sensor on these cameras is pretty small. And then when it comes to the softbox, I would recommend getting the biggest softbox you can fit in your studio to make the light as soft as possible. I'm using 120 centimeter softbox in here, and also position the softbox as close as possible to you to make it as big as possible in relation to you to make the light again significantly softer. And now if you want to reduce light spill on the background as much as possible from the softbox, you can either use the included grid that comes with most softboxes, or you can use a technique that's called light feathering to basically feather the light on yourself and reduce light spill as much as possible. And the way it works is that you should position the light basically so that the softbox, the edge of the softbox, is pretty close to your face and only lighting your face, but not really lighting the background. So at the moment, I can really touch the closest edge of the softbox in here, and it's mainly lighting me, but it's not spilling anything on the background, because usually you would position the middle part of the softbox closer to your face, but that will cause a lot of light spill basically on the background. But now if you want to make the background a little bit more interesting with some creative lighting like I have in here, I would highly recommend to check out SmallRig's compact spotlights. I've made a lot of videos about these spotlights. You can browse on my channel and look for these videos, and I think these lights are the best option honestly if you want to make the background a little bit more interesting, because they are pretty bright, easy to use, not too expensive, and also they allow you to shape the light basically in a very creative way, like these windows that I have in here. Those are created by these SmallRig compact spotlights. Now, final touch on lighting is I would highly recommend investing in like 5-in-1 reflectors. These are very cheap, but they're so useful when you film yourself in a studio environment with pretty much any camera out there. So for example, at the moment, I'm using one behind this reflector to reduce light spill as much as possible. Now I have another reflector in here, which acts as a fill light. Basically, it fills the shadows on this side of my face because the key light is positioned in a pretty extreme angle. So it creates a lot of shadows on this side of my face. So I wanted to just fill in the shadows a little bit with this reflector. And I'm using another reflector in here just above me to reduce the light spill in here caused by the key light. So if you pay close attention, if I'm going to lift this, you'll see I get more exposure on the background. And if I put it back, it reduces the exposure. Here's me lifting it again, putting it down. As you can see, it makes a significant difference. And these 5-in-1 reflectors are super cheap, not more expensive than like $10–20, I believe. All right, next, if you want to make the footage from the Pocket 4 slightly more organic and softer, I would recommend using a mist filter. I'm using one from Freewell in here, which is magnetic, and it makes the skin tones slightly softer, and also it blooms the highlights a little bit, making the shot look a bit more organic compared to the digital look of the Pocket 4. All right, next, I would highly recommend using some sort of a matte box with your Pocket 4, action camera, iPhone when using these cameras in a studio environment, because they produce a lot of ghosting, flaring, and light spills because their lenses are not really optically the best like mirrorless camera, full frame lenses, and so on. Personally, I've built one myself from some black foam. This is basically foam I got with one of my lenses. I glued two of these pieces together, and it basically reduces the ghosting and flaring from the key light in here. Here you can see like a side-by-side shot, one without the matte box and one with the DIY matte box. As you can see, it makes a significant difference when it comes to reducing the light spill flares from the key light, and it is not too expensive, very easy to make, and I have it attached to my Pocket 4 with the Falcon Pocket 4 attachment and a small rig magic arm with a clamp. The clamp basically holds the black foam, so it's not going to be more expensive than like $30, I believe, to create something like this, but it makes a huge difference when it comes to retaining contrast with these compact pocket cameras, action cameras, and so on. And actually, I was using this with my mirrorless camera as well in the studio, but now I got a proper matte box. I would highly recommend building something like this to make the footage from your pocket camera a little bit more professional, if you will. All right, now when it comes to the settings, I would highly recommend using D-Log as much as possible to get the best image quality possible from this camera, and also only to use the base ISO of 400, and then obviously to use the shutter speed of double the frame rate to maintain natural motion blur in your videos, and also to get the most amount of exposure possible into the camera to reduce noise as much as possible. Another thing I want to mention is that I would highly recommend exposing the footage to the right by about 1.5 or 2 stops to reduce noise from the shadows as much as possible. And then later on in post-production, you're going to basically bring down the exposure and make it look normal. Now, the way I did it to make it a bit easier, I've set the shutter speed to 1/120, which is about 1.5 stops over 1/50, and then I exposed my shots with lighting by reviewing with the DJI Mimo app on my phone and so on. And before I started recording, I basically reduced the shutter speed to 1/50 and started recording. And then in post-production, I'm going to bring down the exposure to normal levels. And finally, if you want to like make the shot a little bit more interesting in post-production, you can play around with like power windows or masks to target specific areas of the frame in your editing software to make the shot as cohesive as possible, if you will. Basically, you will target specific areas of the frame and reduce the exposure, change the colors, and so on. And also, because the Pocket 4 does not provide a significant, like a very strong blurry background effect, you can like create a small window around yourself and blur the edges of the frame to make it slightly more interesting. Personally, I'm using the lens blur effect in DaVinci Resolve, which is super easy to use. I set it to about 2 at the intensity level, and it works just fine. So hopefully this video was informative and useful. If you have any questions, comments, and whatnot, let us know down below. And if you want to know what equipment I'm using to create this shot, basically, links are also going to be down below. Anyhow, thank you for watching, and I guess I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye. And Newton is cute. Newton. She's scared of the storm. There's like a storm going on outside, so she came here now for me to keep her safe. Anyhow, bye-bye.